Saccharin. Saccharin was discovered in 1879 by Konstantin Fahlberg, a chemist working in Ira Remsen's lab at Johns Hopkins. After a day studying coal tar derivatives, he went home, sat down for dinner, and noticed his bread tasted unnaturally sweet. He traced the sweetness back to lab residue still on his hands. The compound was somewhere between 300 and 500 times sweeter than sugar. What Fahlberg did next earned him a reputation. He published the discovery jointly with Remsen in 1879. Then in 1884, without telling his mentor, filed patents in Germany and the United States and started industrial production near Magdeburg. Remsen, the man who actually owned the lab, got nothing. He later wrote that hearing his name mentioned alongside Fahlberg's nauseated him. Saccharin became a wartime hero. Sugar was the first thing the US rationed in World War II, and saccharin filled the gap. By the 1970s, it was everywhere. Then in 1977, FDA studies found bladder tumors in rats, and the agency moved to ban it under the Delaney Clause. Public outrage was loud enough that Congress stepped in within months, forcing an 18-month moratorium with a warning label instead. That label, may be hazardous to your health, sat on every diet drink in America for the next 23 years. In 2000, scientists worked out that the rat tumor mechanism didn't actually occur in humans. The label came off in 2001. Saccharin had outlasted every cancer scare ever attached to it, and it's still in your pink Sweet and Low packet today. Cyclamate. Cyclamate has the worst origin story on this list. Michael Sveda was a graduate student at the University of Illinois in 1937, working on anti-fever drug synthesis. He set his cigarette down on the lab bench, picked it up again, and noticed it tasted sweet. That was cyclamate. A graduate student found a billion-dollar industry by smoking through a contaminated cigarette. It was approved in the US in 1958 and was running about $1 billion a year in sales by 1969. Then a study that year fed rats a 10-to-1 cyclamate saccharin mixture and found bladder tumors in 8 out of 60 animals. The dose was equivalent to drinking around 350 cans of Diet Cola every day. The Delaney Clause forced a ban for any animal carcinogenicity at any dose, so cyclamate was pulled in 1970. Later studies failed to replicate the result. Cyclamate is currently legal in over 55 countries, including Canada, the UK, the EU, and Mexico. The US is the holdout. Abbott petitioned to lift the ban in 1973 and was denied, tried again in 1982, and that petition has been sitting in regulatory limbo ever since. Sucralose. Sucralose exists because of a single mispronounced word. In 1976, Indian doctoral student Shashikant Fadnis was working at Queen Elizabeth College in London on a project for Tate and Lyle. His colleague Riaz Khan called and asked him to test a chlorinated sugar compound. Fadnis heard taste. He put it on his tongue and found it intensely sweet. His supervisor's reaction when he heard about it was, "Are you crazy? How can you taste compounds without knowing anything about their toxicity?" The compound was 600 times sweeter than sugar. Tate and Lyle patented it that same year, got FDA approval in 1998 under the name Splenda, and by 2007 it held 60% of the US tabletop sweetener market. The slogan "made from sugar, so it tastes like sugar" became one of the most litigated lines in food advertising. The makers of Equal sued and the Sugar Association sued. The chemistry involves reacting cane sugar with chlorine, replacing 3 hydroxyl groups with chlorine atoms, which creates a compound your body can't metabolize like sugar at all. Whether that counts as made from sugar went to courts in 3 countries. The US case settled the same day the jury reached its verdict. Nobody ever found out what they decided. One more detail. The chlorinated sugars Fadnis had been working with were originally being developed as insecticides. Sucralose is a failed pesticide. ACE-K. Acesulfame potassium was discovered in 1967 by German chemist Karl Klaus at Hoechst. He'd wiped his finger across his sweater, licked it to turn a page, and noticed sweetness. The same accidental finger-licking story as saccharin and aspartame, just with a different chemist and a different sweater. ACE-K is about 200 times sweeter than sugar. It got FDA approval in 1988 and is now in over 90 countries. You've almost certainly consumed it without knowing because it's rarely the headline sweetener on anything. It's the workhorse, the synergist. ACE-K gets blended with aspartame in Coca-Cola Zero Sugar, with sucralose in Pepsi Max, and shows up in sugar-free gums, yogurts, and pediatric medications. Its job is to mask the aftertaste of the other sweeteners and amplify the overall sweetness of the blend. Nobody markets ACE-K, it's just there. Erythritol. Erythritol was discovered in 1848 by Scottish chemist John Stenhouse, who isolated it from lichens. The same Stenhouse later figured out how to nitrate it into an explosive in 1849, then in 1854 invented one of the first practical respirators. Range of interests on that guy. It's a sugar alcohol, about 60 to 70% as sweet as sucrose, with effectively 0 calories because the body absorbs it and then excretes it unchanged in urine. It got US approval in 2001 and quietly became the bulking agent that built the entire modern keto keto industry. A diabetic baked good can be 50% erythritol by dry weight. It's in Truvia, in Lakanto, in basically every natural zero-sugar product on the shelf. Then in February 2023, Stanley Hazen's team at the Cleveland Clinic published a study in Nature Medicine they hadn't planned to write. They'd been hunting for unknown predictors of cardiovascular risk using untargeted metabolomics, and erythritol came up uninvited. Patients with the highest blood levels had roughly twice the rate of heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death over 3 years compared to those with the lowest. Hazen told CNN the risk was on par with the strongest of cardiac risk factors, like diabetes. Follow-up work showed erythritol enhanced platelet clotting in healthy volunteers within hours of drinking a sweetened beverage. The sweetener, marketed as the safest natural alternative, may turn out to be most dangerous to the exact people it was sold to, namely diabetics, the obese, and anyone with metabolic syndrome. Aspartame. Aspartame was discovered in December 1965 by James Schlatter, a chemist at GD Searle in Illinois who was trying to synthesize an ulcer drug. He got some powder on his finger, licked his finger to turn a page in a book, and noticed it was about 200 times sweeter than sugar. That was aspartame. What followed was 16 years of one of the messiest regulatory fights in FDA history. Searle filed for approval in 1973, got initial approval in 1974, then in 1975, the FDA placed a stay on it after finding serious deficiencies in Searle's operations and practices. The 1977 Bressler report documented dead rats listed as alive in studies, tumors removed without records, and 98 of 196 infant mice dead in one trial. A grand jury investigation opened the same year. Then the U.S. attorney running it got recruited by a law firm that worked for Searle. The case stalled, and the statute of limitations on the investigation quietly ran out in December 1977. That same year, Donald Rumsfeld became CEO of Searle. According to a former Searle salesperson, Rumsfeld told staff he'd call in his markers to get aspartame approved. He joined Reagan's transition team in 1980. In April 1981, Reagan appointed Arthur Hull Hayes as the new FDA commissioner. In July 1981, Hayes approved aspartame, overruling the public board of inquiry that had recommended against approval and overruling FDA's own internal scientists who'd advised against it just 2 months earlier. When the original 5-person review commission was trending 3-2 in favor of upholding the ban, Hayes added a 6th member to create a 3-3 deadlock, then broke the tie himself to push the approval through. Hayes left the FDA in November 1983 and took a senior advisory job at Burson Marsteller. Burson Marsteller was Searle's PR firm. Carter-era FDA Commissioner Donald Kennedy, in emails later released by WikiLeaks, reportedly wrote that Rumsfeld has a lot to answer for in his next life. In July 2023, the WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer reclassified aspartame as possibly carcinogenic to humans. The FDA rejected the classification. The argument that started in 1974 is still going. Neotame. Neotame is what NutraSweet built when they realized aspartame's patent was about to expire. Same company, same chemistry family, just with an extra 3,3-dimethyl-butyl group bolted onto the aspartame molecule. The result is somewhere between 30 and 60 times sweeter than aspartame, and roughly 7,000 to 13,000 times sweeter than sugar. NutraSweet ran 2 parallel research teams to find aspartame's successor, one in Illinois and one in France under chemists Claude Nofre and Jean-Marie Tenty at Claude Bernard University in Lyon. The American team turned up around 500 candidate sweeteners. The French team turned up about 2,000. The whole project cost roughly $80 million. Neotame got FDA approval in 2002 under the brand name Neotame. Almost nobody buys Neotame. The market had already moved on to Sucralose, then Stevia, then monk fruit. Global production sits around 500 tons a year, mostly used as a flavor enhancer in the background of other products. Allulose. Allulose is technically a sugar, it just happens to be a rare one. It's an epimere of fructose, about 70% as sweet as sucrose, except the body absorbs it and then excretes most of it unchanged. It became commercially viable in 1994, when Ken Izumori at Kagawa University in Japan discovered the enzyme that converts fructose to allulose at industrial scale. The interesting thing about allulose is regulatory. In 2019, the FDA decided allulose doesn't have to be listed under total sugars or added sugars on nutrition facts labels, despite being a sugar. Tagatose, another rare sugar with a similar metabolic profile, asked for the same exemption in 2022 and was denied. Bonumos's CEO called the decision contradictory and illogical, and in September 2024, a federal judge agreed and vacated the FDA's denial. The keto food industry is currently sitting on top of a labeling privilege that may not survive the next round of rulings. Stevia. Stevia rebaudiana is a small herb native to a corner of northeastern Paraguay and northern Brazil. The Guarani people, specifically the Pai Tavi Terra and Kiowa, had been using it for centuries to sweeten yerba mate and as a folk diabetes remedy. They called it cajajeje, which means sweet herb. Its active compounds, the steviol glycosides, are between 250 and 300 times sweeter than sugar. Japan started using stevia commercially in 1971, and by the 1980s it held over 40% of the Japanese non-sugar sweetener market. The US banned the importation prohibition of stevia for food use in 1991, the trigger was an anonymous trade complaint. The FDA has never released who filed it. Andrew Weil and others pointed out that the timing was suspicious given that aspartame was at peak market share, and NutraSweet was a Monsanto subsidiary at the time with very strong commercial reasons to keep stevia off the shelves. Then in December 2008, Coca-Cola and Cargill submitted Truvia for FDA review, and PepsiCo submitted Purevia. Both were approved within weeks. Stevia, which had been too dangerous for American food in 1991, was suddenly perfectly fine for American food in 2008 because the right companies wanted it. The Guarani get nothing. The global stevia market is worth over $1 billion. None of that money goes to the people who knew about the plant first. Monk fruit. Monk fruit is named after the Buddhist monks who cultivated it. The plant is Ceriatia grosvenorii, a vine in the gourd family, and the earliest written records of its sweet use come from 13th century Chinese monasteries in Guangxi province, near Guilin. The active compounds are mogrosids, which make up about 1% of the fresh fruit and are around 250 times sweeter than sugar. For most of its 800-year history, monk fruit stayed local because it was nearly impossible to grow anywhere else. It needs a specific altitude, humidity, and temperature range that the Guilin Mountains happen to provide. It also spoils fast when fresh, so almost everything sold today is dried or extracted. Procter & Gamble figured out how to mass-produce a clean monk fruit sweetener in 1995, and the FDA granted GRAS status in 2010. It's now in Lakanto, Splenda Naturals, and Starbucks Doubleshot coffee. China banned the export of monk fruit seeds and genetic material in 2004, which means China owns the global supply chain. An 800-year-old herbal remedy from a Buddhist mountain is now a strategic asset. Miraculin. Miraculin is the strangest thing on this list because it isn't sweet. It's a glycoprotein from a West African berry called Syncypalum dulcificum, the miracle berry. When you eat the berry, the protein binds to the sweet taste receptors on your tongue and stays there for somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours. While it's bound, sour foods activate the sweet receptor. Lemons taste like lemonade, vinegar tastes like apple juice. Hot sauce becomes confusingly fruity. The protein itself has no flavor, it just rewires your tongue. In the early 1970s, a biomedical student named Robert Harvey founded a company called Miraculin to commercialize Miraculin as a sugar substitute, especially for diabetics. By 1974, he had Reynolds, Barclays, and Prudential as investors and a finished toxicology study showing no negative effects in rats. According to Harvey and his vice president Don Emery, in the months before launch, they were followed home from work, photographed by people in cars parked outside their offices, and walked in on a burglary one evening where the FDA file had been left open on the floor. Then the FDA classified Miraculin as a food additive instead of GRAS, requiring expensive new testing that Miraculin couldn't afford. The company collapsed before launch. Aspartame was approved 7 years later. Same regulator, opposite outcome. Miraculin is now legal in the US as a fresh berry or a freeze-dried tablet, but not as a food additive. It mostly survives as a party trick where people eat the berry and then drink lemon juice for fun. A small 2026 clinical study is examining whether miracle fruit can help cancer patients with chemotherapy-induced taste alterations, and about half the participants reported their sense of taste improved. The artificial sweetener business is roughly 150 years old at this point. Almost every major sweetener was discovered by accident, often by a chemist who tasted something he had no business tasting. Almost every one was banned or threatened with banning at some point, and almost every ban came down for procedural rather than scientific reasons. The one that wasn't synthetic and the one that was just a berry from a tree is the one that never made it out of the lab.